Welcome to the Empowered Mothers Network, where we support mothers to be the best version of themselves. I'm Sarah, and this is episode 20, which is called Resilience. So in this episode, we're going to talk about the decline in resilience that we've had in modern years, as well as victim mentality, ways to build resistance, and also that balance of knowing when to have resilience and when there's a closed door and to maybe let go and move on. So stay tuned. So resilience, okay. So I wanted to talk about that today because it's something that, again, it's come up in my own life. If it comes up in my own life, I like to tend to talk about it on the podcast because it's usually affecting somebody else at the same time as well. And yeah, nowadays it can be quite lacking in some areas, and I don't think it's necessarily our own, we can maybe take things personally and think it's our own fault that we're not resilient enough. But as I'm going to discuss in this episode, it's not that simple. So I guess the first question would be, why is resilience so important in motherhood? And then, I guess the answer is fairly straightforward once you start to think about it, is that you, especially with young children, if you're in that space of things, you've got kids who demand so much of you, and it can get very repetitive. You've got the same things over and over. You've ever had an argument with a 3-year-old, there's no way you can win it. No matter what you say, there's no way you can win it. So that the cultivating resilience is something that's really, to me, it's really important in like the early days of motherhood, with the repetitiveness and the loss of kind of your own time and possibly your own self. So resilience can kind of see us through that stage of life with kids where we can often be in like survival mode, and before we kind of come back out the other side and start to re-emerge and find ourselves and our new identities and things like that. So particularly in our society, in like the UK, America, nowadays, Western world, there has been quite a decline in resilience. I think about what we used to have to do thousands of years ago, where we had to sort of, be on our feet all day, foraging for food. We were under more constant threat of attack, but we had a more resilient nature to boot. So, obviously society has changed and there are pros and cons to it, but I think a lot of things now are, made easier for us. As time's gone on, technology's evolved, things have got easier, things have been invented to make our life easier, to make things simpler. Just off the top of my head, like a good example is probably a lot of stuff in the kitchen now that we have to make life easier, like washing machines, so we don't have to wash all the clothes by hand, microwaves, just, everyday things like that. So a lot of the barriers we always had, or the hurdles we had to overcome in life, or the hardships we had to go through as just part of day-to-day life, have slowly over time, as society has evolved, been slowly removed. So now we're at this place where, if you want to eat something or go somewhere, you pretty much just click a few buttons. You can buy something and have it even sometimes the next day. Things are a lot easier, which is great in some ways, but in terms of like resilience, we're not having that as much now, because we're not needing to be resilient as much because things are easier for us. So some of you might have read the book The Comfort Crisis by Michael Easter, and that talks a lot about this concept I'm talking about today, about decreased resilience in the modern world, and some of the ways we can find to get it back, and why we'd need to get it back as well. So I've just mentioned at the beginning about why, maybe we need it in motherhood, but across the board, it's a useful, resilience is an important part of, especially if we're on a path of personal growth, it's like a really important part of that, because as many of you will know, if you're on a path of personal growth, whether that's just got the spiritual element or not, doesn't matter, but whether you're on that path, then it's never straightforward, it's never easy, it's never I'm at point A, I will just go to point B, it's over there, off I go, oh I'm there. There's always you know, life always has hurdles and roadblocks, and things just don't go to plan, and things come up that, you know, I've like thinking back about my own life, there's situations where until they'd happened in my life, I couldn't fathom how I'd get through them. And things like death and miscarriage, you know, if that's not happened to you, you think, well, how would I even get through that situation? But then when it does happen to you, you have that resilience that helps you get through those difficult life situations. So it's a very necessary skill, because we will all guaranteed have some kind of life situations. At the very least, we will all at least have to watch or deal with the death of somebody close to us in our lives. So resilience is this really important tool to cultivate that we've just kind of lost along the way, and everything being a bit easier for us. The next thing I wanted to talk about was this concept of the victim mentality. So society now seems to have turned to a place where it's kind of quite supportive of that victim mentality generally. And that really tends to affect our resilience as well. And to me, how I see that playing out is that certain structures and certain things in society, you know, like governments and larger structures and organisations that are currently, let's face it, crumbling on their arse, kind of different sections of society are really pitting people against each other nowadays. So to me, it's like there's so much energy being invested by the bigger power structures that are crumbling into pitting people against each other on a smaller level and causing conflict. And then also kind of then, you know, like doing that on one side and then on the other side putting a hand in and fueling this victim mentality. So it's a very sort of manipulative energy, you know. It's, if you've ever had someone in your life who, you know, to your face is all kind of nicey and cosseting you and but then behind your back is manipulating you and really, you know, sticking the knife in, kind. It's that kind of energy and that kind of mentality. And when that victim mentality has kind of become the norm in culture as it has now, and I would say things like, again, it's difficult with labelling and things because, you know, if you have this concept of like woke culture and things like that now, and all these terminologies nowadays like cancel culture and all this, I'm sounding so old, but yeah, you know, it means different things to different people. But we seem to be in a place now where we're just sort of encouraged and got to this place where everyone's so easily offended. And, you know, for me, it's, I see the side of the coin where, you know, things have changed, where like when I was younger, growing up in the 80s and 90s, it's, things were said and, you know, women were portrayed in a certain way where, you know, it wasn't good and it wasn't okay that they were portrayed like that. And there is that butting against that kind of thing, which I think was good and needed. But at the same time, we've kind of gone right the other way in terms of we're then mortally offended at like anything and everything now as a culture, really, as a whole. So we're slowly moving out of that culture that's really sort of against and derogatory to women. But then in some ways, we've also moved into this thing where everyone as a culture is just gets mortally offended at everything, and people are now sort of being pitted against each other, and it's almost like, you know, you have a different point of view to me, therefore we are opposed, we can't like each other, and I'm offended because of what you've said, because it's a different point of view to mine, basically, which just is not working either, let's face it. So this concept of being, you know, mortally offended at everything that is now pervading our culture is really damping down our own personal resilience and spirit. You know, resilience kind of calls for us to gather our inner resources, maybe against something that we don't want to do or is uncomfortable, but gather our inner resources and go out and face it head on and do it anyway, or move through that situation anyway. Whereas the victim mentality that we're kind of all been exposed to for quite a few years now is more like, oh, sit back, you don't have to take this on. And that's where the resilience has gone. We don't have to move through those situations. You can stay back. You don't have to gather everything up you've got. We can make you more comfortable without you having to deal with this kind of energies. And again, if you're seeing now this sort of massive shift that's happening on the planet, whether you're seeing it from like a spiritual point of view and it's an involvement in our consciousness, or whether you're just seeing it more on a practical point of view, so you're seeing like, the old systems now are quite obviously in front of our eyes crumbling, and you're seeing it more on that practical level as well, you can appreciate that resilience is probably the number one thing really, that as mothers and as women right now we really need to cultivate it. And yeah, I feel like in society as well there's like the double-edged sword against women and mothers, where society kind of holds up that image of the mother of being the nurturer of the children and in the home, and there's this whole movement now of like natural parenting, and we can do everything as women and mothers, and there's that side of things, but there's the other side of things that's like, once you get to a certain age, once you become a mother, you're not very useful in terms of the patriarchal side of things, looks wise, you're a bit past it, love, get out and, go back in the kitchen kind of mentality is still there. It's still there. It's changing, I think, from what it did, but there's still an undercurrent of it. There's still this, it's even worse now in a way of, we're encouraged as women to have it all and do it all. And I think we're finally getting to the point now actually where we're realising we can't. To me, like, again, growing up in the 90s, that was the time where women were like, it was girl power, Spice Girls, ladette culture. It was all, we're as good as men, we're equal to men, we can do what men do. And then it's been that learning curve of, yeah, but we're not the same as men. We're not meant to be the same. We're not meant to be female versions of men. We're meant to step into our own femininity and own that, and just we can be equal whilst being very different. So now it's kind of getting that separation where we've been pitted against each other in a way, and just coming back to the inner feminine again as well. And I think the inner feminine can really help, if you have a practice of some way, and it doesn't have to be, all crystals and tarot cards and trances. You can have your own practical ways of connecting with the feminine energy in your life. Something that I've started doing fairly recently and has been really helpful for me is just simply grounding. You grounding your energy, getting on the earth barefoot, just standing outside, got a bit of lawn or some ground somewhere where you can just stand without shoes on or sit, and just ground with the earth, and that really helps me to kind of connect with that earth energy and that feminine energy and the energy of creation and resilience as well. Because if you think about how resilient the earth is, whether you're of the opinion that the earth is a conscious being or not, you can't argue that the earth isn't bloody resilient. So for me, grounding and well, for me, working with crystals as well is a really simple way of connecting to that energy of resilience. So probably the other main tip I would have, if you're looking to build your resilience, is doing stuff that is uncomfortable, doing stuff you don't necessarily like doing. And the biggest probably example would be, for a lot of people, would maybe be regular exercise. So I'm not just talking about, I think a lot of us have exercise that we enjoy doing, which is great. But sometimes if you get really into like exercise as a practice, there will be inevitably days where you don't want to do it, and that's where the resilience kicks in. That's where you need to cultivate that. So, if you're into running, it might be that you try and run however many times a week that you want to do. And running's a really good one for resilience. It's building that mindset of, on the days you don't want to go out or the days you don't think you can really go any further, tapping into that inner resilience is something that can be really cultivated well, I think, with a kind of exercise regime. And there are like tons of practical ways you could just start tapping into that energy of resilience. If you maybe accept a position at work that's going to stretch you in some way, or doing some kind of project that you maybe wouldn't choose to do yourself. Like, for example, this podcast, I've said this before on my podcast, I prefer writing rather than speaking. So for me, this podcast is like, it takes a certain amount of resilience to kind of show up every week and record something, because it's not something that necessarily comes easy to me, but there is something inside me pushing me to do it and continue doing it and continue to practice and get better at it, hopefully. So it's finding those things in your life where the moments where can you just make something a little bit harder for yourself in a way. And we don't want to, because we're conditioned to always look for the easiest, the simplest, the shortest way. But are there any parts of your life where you could just make something a little bit harder, or go and do something that maybe you feel inside is like intuitively it's like a good thing, a useful thing, a positive thing for you to do, but it's one of them things where excuses get in the way, and maybe you procrastinate about something, and maybe you've just put barriers in the way of you doing it. Excuses, things like that bring up a lot of excuses, are often things that if we kind of really dive into, lean into, they can really help us cultivate that resilience. And that might be the reason why you feel drawn to do something you don't quite want to do in the first place. It might be because it will help you on your path of growth to develop a more resilient spirit. And the final thing I wanted to talk about in terms of resilience, and it seems good now because it's like just after the autumn equinox when I'm recording this, so it's a time of balance. So it's talking about the balance. Again, resilience is a scale, and whilst we are learning to bring something back into balance, in this case resilience, it can be sometimes we go too far in the other direction. So if we were too far in our comfort zone and we're pushing out of it and cultivating resilience, there will be situations where maybe we need to remain flexible and remain aware and open, that we've got to discern between whether we need to be resilient or whether it's a genuine like closed door, and recognising when we need to step back in some way. I think many of us have probably been in that situation where there's been something that, maybe we've started a project or something where we want to keep going with it, and we get really sort of like bullheaded and just want to keep going, and we are resilient and we're digging in, and we keep trying. Maybe something's not worked quite a few times and we just keep trying, and then it can often take somebody else to come in and say, look, I think you need to let this go or step back in some way. So it's finding that balance, because we want to be resilient, and there will be things in life where we do have to keep trying. We can't expect everything to work straight away. So there are times where we have to keep going and really dig into that inner resilience. But there are also equally times where we might have to just take a step back and let go of that thing. So hopefully in this podcast I've chatted a little bit about, there goes the table, the decline of resilience in society now, and also a few tips and strategies for building resilience in our lives and why we should. And also, we've covered why sometimes, we need to be a bit more discerning about whether we need to be resilient or whether we need to just take a step back. And finally, I think when we're on this journey as well, nurturing our own resilience, it's important to include our children in that as well, because they are developing. And I think, to me, a lot of the same societal issues of things are now made easier for us are also, applying to our kids as well. They have very different childhoods now to kind of what we had, and certainly what our parents had. Being as like grandparents, often were sort of playing out on the streets, and it's probably a bit more left to their own devices. Again, society now is very heavy on the, parent being 100% of everything for the kids, and all the pressure of having to take kids on days out all the time and do activities constantly with them and be constantly basically their entertainer. Whereas sort of maybe my generation and before, it wasn't as much about that. There was more time of just letting kids be kids and be themselves, and letting them be bored sometimes as well. Yeah, to me, that letting kids be kids also helped them foster their own resilience. I think we're very risk aware now as a culture as well, and sometimes I've done it with my own kids. Sometimes you can be a bit too like helicopter parenting. You get too far in there, and just you could maybe sometimes take a step back and just let them take some risks. Obviously, be taking risks where they're going to put themselves in danger per se, but there are some times where I think kids do need a little bit more of I think they call it risky play, don't they? It's not, it sounds awful, that. It's like risky play. But yeah, there's situations where we can maybe step back a little bit, and it's really hard to do this. I find it hard to do it myself as a parent, but step back a little bit and just let them experience the world a bit more and cultivate their own resilience. And as ever, I'd love to hear your experiences on resilience. Do you think as well that we are in a place now where things are made so easy for us that we're losing touch with that resilience? Do you have any tips for building your own resilience? Perhaps you found that through exercise or breath work or another practice. Do you have any tips as well about fostering resilience in your kids that you could share with us? If you have any of those kind of things you want to share them with us, then please do in the comments below. Otherwise, you can continue to join Empowered Mothers Network as a community by either subscribing on YouTube and get the latest podcast episodes. They are on Spotify and Apple and whatnot, as well as audio, but they are a little bit behind at the moment because I can only upload a certain amount of data per month on my plans. So at the moment, I'm slowly catching up. I'm not sure what episode it will be on the audio by the time this is uploaded to YouTube. But yeah, YouTube is a little bit ahead at the moment. As soon as I can get them all to sync up nicely together, I will do. Also, the best way of staying in touch and getting the fortnightly Empowered Mothers Network journal is go to the website and you can sign up to join the network there. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on resilience, and I will see you soon for the next podcast episode.